We're a couple of weeks removed from the NFL draft, and I'm significantly more pessimistic about Davius Richards' NFL future going forward. Oh, yeah, it's locked on HBCU. Play my music.
You are Locked On HBCU, your daily podcast covering HBCU sports. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, family? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked On HBCU podcast, your number one daily one-stop shop for everything HBCU athletics, Monday through Friday, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I, of course, Sam Darian Gray, a.k.a. the Mouth of the South, Texas Southern alum and former TSU Herald Sports editor and current contributing writer at USA Today Saints Wire. Thank you for going on this journey with me. Make a Locked On HBCU your first listen of the day every day. And remember, just because the mic cuts off does not mean that the journey is over. Just means it's time to follow me on Twitter at South Exclusives. Starts with an S and ends with an S. I'm super excited because we had a camera malfunction for those who are on the audio visual side and not just the audio side. We had a little camera malfunction before the recording, so I'm using the laptop camera, and I hit all my marks perfect, so I was pretty excited about that. This is going to be a good show. We'll wrap up this very quality show with a look at the SWAC All Tournament softball team. Prior to that, we'll look at Jackson State and Morgan State, both winning in their softball tournaments, and now they're moving into the NCAA tournament, a.k.a. the Women's College World Series. We kick off today's episode, though, out there at North Carolina Central, because Davius Richards is yet to be picked up by an NFL team. And as the days go on, I find myself increasingly more pessimistic. It was something that I did not notice at first, but then as I thought about it, I thought about the ramifications of the fact that he has not been on the NFL roster. So at the end of February, I think it was either the end of January or the end of February, but at the HBCU Legacy Bowl, Davius Richards got injured. It was something that took the air out of the entire event. I've said it's taken the air out of the entire draft cycle, and I do not believe that that's hyperbole. But the impact of that injury has gone farther than even I thought it would, because I believe that due to this injury, you may never see Davius Richards in an NFL game ever, right? And I think that, and I mean preseason anything, I think that that is a real thing that we're running a risk of. I'm trying to make sure that I'm not being overly dramatic. I'm trying to make sure I'm not overselling it, because I really want to give you the real. So let me temper it down a little bit. Let me be a little bit more in the middle. Davius Richards may have no NFL future going forward. And that's me honestly tempering it down as much as I can. And it's all because of that injury, the timing of it. See, I only focus on draft stock. When speaking about Davius Richards, you've heard me talk about the impact that this injury has had on him and his ability to be drafted. But every conversation around that is always about being drafted, whether that is just draft stock, whether that's being able to perform in certain things, or it's all related around him hearing his name called and thinking he could still be a UDFA. But you want to know the reason, in my opinion, that Davius Richards is not on an NFL roster right now is because he literally cannot play. Not because he doesn't have the quality, not because he doesn't have the skill, not because he can't play in that aspect, but because he literally cannot play the game of football at the moment due to this injury. And the fact that he's not on a roster as a quarterback is only going to continue to hurt him. It's only going to continue to hurt him because there's no mental reps that he can get. If he was on a roster, he could do mental reps. If Davius Richards was on an NFL roster right now, let's say he was with the Cleveland Browns, he could be learning the Cleveland Browns playbook as we speak. But because he isn't on the Cleveland Browns, he doesn't have that option. And there's no, I'm just going to learn all these playbooks. That it doesn't work like that. As a quarterback, you can't learn this basic information and just hope that it translates. No, Davius Richards is being hindered by the fact that he's not on a roster, because at his position, learning the game is just as much as the talent level. It's just as much as, or it's just as important, I should say, right? So from an NFL point of view, why would I take a risk on a UDFA quarterback who isn't medically cleared. I don't see a reason that Davius Richard wouldn't hurry up and get this done because, like I said, getting those mental reps are important. But if I'm an NFL player or NFL team, why would I do that? If I was an NFL team, why would I even put myself behind that? I'm going to wait. If I'm Davius Richard, or if I'm a team, and I'm looking at Davius Richard, I'm sitting here thinking, can you give me a definitive date that you'll be cleared? Can you give me an extremely positive update on your medical status? Right? Like, because if you can't, what am I getting from this? What is the reason that I will go ahead and take that risk? Because even me being a Davius Richard fan can't necessarily see why I would do that. I would wait until it's closer to you being medically cleared. Now, let's say that happens around July, because we hear that he'll be cleared for the draft or for the training camp. That's in August. Let's say he's cleared in July. I pick you up in July. You're not learning that playbook that fast. You're just not. You're miles behind any other rookie. You got, let's see, training camp is right now in May. Let's just say you got drafted. Well, you got drafted in April. Let's just say you start learning the playbook immediately. You have all of May and you have all of June, and you probably have part of July before Davius Richard is cleared. So you're looking at about 10 weeks of learning the playbook that as a quarterback, he just won't have. He's jumping right into it. When everybody else is at least halfway through, he's still learning his baby steps. That's going to be extremely difficult for him. I wouldn't want that. However, on a positive note, and I think I'll probably end it here, on a positive note, if Davius Richard is picked up, especially if it's in late July, I feel confident that he'll make a practice squad, because I feel like that means they see a little bit of talent, a little bit of developmental ability and a developmental ceiling that I would want to put him on, or I would want to put him on my team because of that ceiling. That's the way that I kind of look at it. So if he gets picked up in July, oh, well, okay, probably makes the practice squad as long as he doesn't mess it up, and we'll see where he goes from there. It won't guarantee he'll be on a roster in 2025 and going into a training camp in 2025. But I do feel like if he gets picked up in July of 2024, he'll at least be on a practice squad and given the chance to develop throughout the regular season. So there's a little bit of a positive in that if you're looking for a little bit of the silver lining. Now, as you push forward, there's no need to have a silver lining for these two teams. Morgan State and Jackson State, the two winners in the SWAC and MEAC softball tournament, they are now going to the Women's College World Series, and we'll break that down as we continue with Locked On HBCU. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. And if you're a small business owner, what are you doing if you're not using LinkedIn? If you're not using LinkedIn to find the right people for your candidate, or the right candidate for your job faster and for free, I don't understand. I just gave you two reasons to do it. It's faster and it's for free. If you don't want to pay any money, come on to LinkedIn.com/LockedOnCollege. If you don't want to have any kind of risk, go to LinkedIn.com/LockedOnCollege, right? And you're getting the reward of having a fantastic employee without any sort of risk of anything. It's a win. It's a W regardless, right? You're not hurting even if you can't find somebody, but that's rare. Only 14% of small business owners have failed to find the right candidate for their job in the first 24 hours. That means you're finding the right candidate and you're finding them as quick as possible. But there's only one way to do that. That's to go ahead and use the purple hashtag hiring frame and post your job for free at LinkedIn.com/LockedOnCollege. As we continue rolling on today's episode of Locked On HBCU, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day. For your second listen, make sure you're checking out Locked On Sports Today. It's the first of its kind, 24/7, all day, every day, live sports network on YouTube. So go ahead and check out Locked On Sports Today. Now, I want to go over the softball champions in the MEAC and in the SWAC. We have Morgan State representing the Mid-Eastern Athletic Conference, and you have Jackson State representing the Southwestern Athletic Conference. And it's time for the softball women's college softball. That feels redundant to say softball women's. It does. It feels very redundant. And I feel like that's not it, right? So I call it the softball NCAA tournament, aka the Women's College World Series, or vice versa, depending on which one you want to put first. Before we get into that, because there's only two teams, y'all know how this goes. When we get into the national stage on the Division I level, FCS level, you're only going to see, or not even on the FCS level, but you're only going to see one team, two teams. If you have the FCS playoffs, you're only going to see one HBCU in there, right? If you're going into the NCAA tournament in basketball, you're going to see one HBCU from each conference. If you get 3, it's probably because Tennessee State or North Carolina A&T or Hampton won in their respective non-HBCU conferences. It's just how this goes. The softball landscape is no different. It's no different. We'll break down what that bracket really looks like. We'll break down what that bracket looks like in a little bit. But first, let's get into the teams themselves. So Morgan State, they set a record. They had a really strong season for their softball team. The Bears won 30 games in a regular season, which is near a school record already that they set in 2022. The fact that they set a record in 2022 and then eventually came in and broke that record in 2024, that just tells you the recent success that Morgan State has had on the diamond, because in 2022, they had 31 victories, which at the time was a school record. They won 30 this year in the regular season, and then they actually lost in the first round of the MEAC tournament. Now, that's when you get a little bit of pressure on you, because once that happens, there's no more room for error. There's no more margin for error. You cannot lose again. Otherwise, you're sitting at home, and you're sitting here one game away from a school record. Not only do they obviously not lose again, they rattle off 5 victories in a row. 1 on Thursday, 2 on Friday, 2 on Saturday. So they spent Friday and Saturday playing multiple games because, hey, that's what they had to do. When you're in here trying to come back from behind, and they started behind because they lost that first game against North Carolina Central, that's what happens. And you were the 1 seed, so you came in expected to win, but this is not the route that you expected to take in order to get there. Because you have 30 wins, you win the next game, boom, you have 31, you tie the record, boom, you win the next game, you have 32. You've now you own the record, and you eventually work up to 35. So you expanded that record by a good amount. 4 games is a solid amount. So 35 wins in a single season is now the most in Morgan State softball history. But when you just go through the path that they had to take, it's one that's extremely, extremely impressive, and it's one that I can't discount. Because, yes, we expected them to do this, but when you compare it to Jackson State, they're 2 completely different routes. They're just 2 completely different routes, and it's having to deal with the pressure every single game. Jackson State did have to deal with the pressure of a tournament, and this isn't a knock to JSU. They did have to deal with the pressure of a tournament, but they didn't have to deal with the pressure of every single game they could be playing for their lives, right? Because after the first game, that's when Morgan State was stepping into, and they won 5 in a row consecutive. And now they're moving into the NCAA or the Women's College World Series. Then you look at Jackson State, who came out of the SWAC, and their tournament was like a Mortal Kombat victory, how they were just flawless, right? So you're looking at 1, 2, 3, 4. That's it. I beat every team that I was put up against, including FAMU. Who FAMU had a good record against them in the regular season. They were actually 2-4 against Jackson, or 2-4 against FAMU. So a losing record, and they played 2 season series. Excuse me. Jackson State and FAMU played 2 season series, and FAMU took both of them 2-1. So this was a team that had your number coming out of the regular season, and for you to be able to knock them off, I thought that was very impressive, and probably the most impressive part about it. And so winning 5 games in a row, winning against the team that beat you 4 times in the season, winning against them back-to-back, something you hadn't done all year, that's very impressive. And now Jackson State has won 6 games going into the College World Series. Now let's go into the rules and how this breaks down. The softball tournament is very similar. It's the same size to March Madness, same size as the NCAA tournament in basketball, 64 teams, 32 conference champions, 32 at-large bids. So that's very familiar. A couple of differences is, one, you don't have the play-in, so there's no first 4, right? Because, the whole we're gonna bring 68. Technically, yeah, this is both on the men's and the women's now. So technically, in March Madness, you have 68 teams in the bracket that all count, but we only care about 64. They ain't even got those extra 4 folks that we don't care about in softball, So not only that, the biggest difference is how it's divided. So in basketball, it's 4 regions, 16 teams. But in softball, it's 16 teams in 4 in each. It's 16 regions in 4 in each region. So that's a big difference. And you only have seeding of the first 16 teams. Everybody else, we don't care. Jackson State could be the 64th team for all we know. They're not, but They could be. So now we look at Jackson State. They go into, or excuse me, that section, that bracket is called the regionals. It's a double elimination bracket. Now we go into regionals. From there, you go to super regionals. But we're just going to look at regional right now because that's where we are. Jackson State, they are heading down to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and they open up regionals against LSU, the host, the 9th seed. Morgan State is in Durham, and they'll be facing off against Duke, the host, the 10th seed. I hate that they both face the hosting teams, but it's a double elimination tournament. You only have 4 teams in each bracket. It kind of feels inevitable. Wish you wouldn't have to face the top team, though, right? Like that already puts you at a disadvantage. And I don't really think that Jackson State and Morgan State have much experience as far as playing top level teams. They just haven't played them, let alone beat them. But Jackson State has Memphis on the record. I don't think Morgan State had anybody of note. Honestly, Penn, like there was no big schools on either of these teams scheduled this year. So they don't really have that aspect. But who knows? Maybe Morgan State playing with pressure against them gives them that same feel. I'm not sure. But overall, this just isn't something that they're used to. It'll be interesting to see how they play going against a team like LSU, going against a team like Duke. But as we push forward, we're not going to look at who they're playing nationally. We're just going to focus on the SWAC and look at the fact that the all SWAC softball tournament team is really dominated by 3 teams, and it's kind of surprising. But we'll look at that as we continue with Locked On HBCU. As a wrap up today's episode of Locked On HBCU, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day, making all the way to segment 3, and I thank you 2 times for that. We've broken down Jackson State's tournament championship, but now I want to go a little bit bigger. That was actually the first one in 10 years. It's been over a decade. Since Jackson State softball has won a SWAC tournament. So I should have mentioned that in there one, and that's a big deal. But as big of a deal as it is, they weren't the only ones. They ain't just play air, right? They weren't just swinging. They weren't just playing against machines that pitch the ball. They played against some teams. And in that tournament, you had an all SWAC tournament team. So I want to break it down because it should come as no surprise that Jackson State, the champions, ended up having the most players on this tournament team. Like that should be no surprise, right? They won every game. They were the champions. Logically, they should have the most, and they have 5. Now, that was eye-catching, the fact that they have 5. I expected them to have the most of anybody, but to have nearly half of the team, that was something that genuinely did catch my eye. So, yeah, you had that, but there was 12 players on the team. They had 5 of them. But what caught my eye even more is I looked and I said, okay, what about everybody else? Hey, this is really only split up against a few teams. When you really look at it, it's Jackson State, FAMU, Bama State, and then one lady from PV. That's it. So really, this is a Jackson State, FAMU, Alabama State team, which FAMU and Jackson State were the top teams in the East. Bama State was the 4th place technically, but they were only 1 game behind Jackson State at 2nd. So, and then PV had the best record of anybody in softball and SWAC softball. So I guess if you look at it that way, it kind of makes a little sense. And then Alabama State, FAMU, and Jackson State were all the remaining 3. They were the last team. So you have FAMU, who played Jackson State in the semifinals. Then they lost, went down to the loser bracket, beat Alabama State, who was at the head of that because they had lost to Jackson State earlier. So they were in the loser bracket because of that. And then FAMU beat Alabama State in order to come back and play Jackson State again. But then we all know what happened, and that's that Jackson State won yet again. So it's just a revolving door of losing to Jackson State. But anyway, I was a little bit surprised because you see this on 4 teams. If this was basketball, whatever, it's 5 players, okay? But in softball, where it's 12 players on each team, I was stunned about that. That one kind of surprised me. So let's go through. You have Viviana Figueroa on Prairie View. From Alabama State, you have Koana Poussin, you have Jada Gardner, and you have Alexia Denby. Then FAMU, you have Nia Morgan, Zoriana Hughes, Maya Blasingon. Hope I didn't mess that up. I'm sorry. Then on Jackson State, you have Victoria Salazar, Mari Stevens, Jace Jackson, who was the MVP, Julie Lopez, and then Kalia Gibson. So you have 5 players from Jackson State, 3 players from FAMU, 3 players from Alabama State, and then 1 player from PV to make up those 12 women who made that team. This was a fantastic softball season. I think this might be our first or second time talking about it. But I appreciate y'all. I appreciate this. Hopefully we have this camera kind of settled. Honestly, this was kind of flustering. I didn't really like having the camera this close to me. It was weird. I'm used to it being farther back, but we work. And as long as we have to work with this being the situation, then that will be the situation. But I appreciate y'all for bearing with me. Hopefully we can get this solved by the end of the week. Definitely will be solved by next week. 1,000%. This will not be the case. I will not have this camera this close to me starting next week. But I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day. On tomorrow's episode, we'll be looking at a new Jackson State running back recruit. We'll be looking at that on tomorrow's episode, especially if the camera's working a little bit better. I'll be excited to do that. But in the meantime, in between time, until next time we hear each other, family, take care, stay blessed. Peace.